Hello, my name is Jeremy Houck, and I'd like to thank you for making the choice to join us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. As we begin today, I want you to picture a waiting room, a hospital waiting room. Not because I want to depress you in the first 30 seconds of this message, but because I believe that most of us have spent more time in a waiting room like this than we care to admit. Maybe not literally, but you know the room that I'm describing. The chairs don't quite match. There's a coffee maker in the corner over there that hasn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. There's a TV bolted to the wall, muted, playing the rerun of a game show that nobody's really watching. There's a clock on the wall that said 2:47 for the last hour and a half, and you have your phone in your hand, but you're not really looking at anything on it. You're just holding it so you have some place to put your hands. Every time a doorway opens down the hall, your head snaps up. Every time you hear footsteps, your stomach tightens. You've mentally rehearsed every possible sentence the doctor might say when they finally come through that door. The bad version, the good version, the version where they use the word, "we're very concerned." Here's the thing about waiting rooms. The actual waiting is never really the hardest part. The hardest part is what that waiting does to you on the inside while you're there. The way your mind starts creating this worst case scenario, the way you start bargaining with God under your breath, the way you smile at the receptionist like everything's fine when nothing is fine. But here's what I want you to actually see. I believe most of us are living in a waiting room even when we're nowhere near the hospital. Maybe your waiting room is a mailbox you keep checking, or a phone that just won't ring, or a bedroom down the hall that's still empty. And now you've started to wonder if God even hears your prayers anymore, or if they just kind of stop at the ceiling. I want to introduce you to somebody today who spent years, actual years, in a waiting room like that. Her name is Hannah, and her story is tucked into the very first pages of 1 Samuel, a book that's all about how kingdoms rise and fall. But true to form, God doesn't start that story with a king. He starts that story with a broken-hearted woman nobody outside her own house had ever heard of. 1 Samuel opens by introducing us to a man named Elkanah. Good family from the hill country of Ephraim, gives us the whole resume. And we discover he has two wives, Peninnah and Hannah. And right away, we should brace ourselves, because every time that arrangement shows up in the Bible, somebody's going to get hurt. We find out that Peninnah has children. The text says sons and daughters. Hannah, she didn't have any. And in that culture, being barren wasn't just a private sadness that you processed with your therapist. It was a public verdict. Children were considered proof that God was blessing you, which means that if you don't have any kids, everybody just quietly assumes that God's withholding something from you, that he'd freely handed the woman sitting at the table with you all of the blessings, and for whatever reason, you get none. Every year, this family made a pilgrimage to worship, and every year, like a rerun that you can't turn off, the same scene plays out. Elkanah hands out portions of the sacrificial meat to Peninnah and to each of her kids, and then he turns to Hannah and he gives her a double portion, because the text is really plain. He loved her. And I think that detail actually matters. This isn't the story about a husband that doesn't care. Elkanah loved Hannah, but love doesn't automatically protect you from pain. You can be loved well by somebody and still carry a grief that they can't fully reach, a wound that just won't heal. And Peninnah knew exactly where that wound was. The scripture says that she would provoke Hannah and taunt her viciously. This is not just some offhanded comment in a family dinner. This is somebody who studies your soft spot and presses on it on purpose at that one time of the year that was supposed to be sacred. Maybe you have a Peninnah. Maybe it's a sibling or a coworker who somehow always brings up the thing that hurts you the worst in front of the most people at the worst possible moment. Maybe it's a parent that likes to relive and retell your worst moments. Or maybe your Peninnah isn't really even a person. Maybe it's just a voice that shows up in your own head right when you sit down in church and whispers, everybody else has got this figured out. You're still the only one waiting. So Hannah wept. She wouldn't eat, and Elkanah, bless his heart, tried to fix it the way that a lot of us try to fix things we don't understand. He says, why are you crying? Why aren't you eating? Why are you so sad just because you don't have any kids? You have me. I'm better than 10 sons, right? I want to give the guy at least some credit because I think that's a real sentence that a real husband actually says when he's trying to help. But actually, it's a master class in how not to comfort somebody. That's the equivalent of somebody in the middle of grief hearing, well, at least you got your health. It might be completely true, and it's still completely unhelpful. Elkanah is trying to solve Hannah's sadness with logic and reassurance, and what Hannah needs is somewhere to take her actual pain. And this is where the story turns, because Hannah refuses to march over and give Peninnah a piece of her mind. She doesn't vent to Elkanah until he feels as miserable as she does. She takes her pain to the only place that can actually do something about it. She gets up, she goes to the tabernacle. 1 Samuel 1:10 says, Hannah was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord. I love how the Bible refuses to clean this up for us. It doesn't say that she composed herself and offered a dignified, well-worded prayer. It says she was in deep anguish, crying bitterly. This is a woman coming completely undone in front of God. And the beautiful part is she doesn't try to hide it from him. She makes a vow while she's there. O Lord of heaven's armies, if you will look upon my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son, then I will give him back to you. He will be yours for his entire lifetime as a sign that he has been dedicated to the Lord. His hair will never be cut. That's not a normal bargain. She's not saying, God, will you give me a baby so that I can finally win at the Thanksgiving dinner table? She's saying, God, I want you to give me a son so that I can give the son back to you. That's a surrender before she ever has anything to surrender. I mean, think about what that actually means. She already hears the neighbors whispering behind her back. She has the unintentional pain of a husband trying to fix it and the intended pain of a rival who taunts her. And she doesn't say, God, will you give me a son so that I can finally be at peace? She says, God, I want you to give me a son so that I can give him right back to you. And honestly, most of our prayers don't work that way. We want the gift, and we want to keep the gift, and we want to ask God to keep blessing the gift. God, give me a job so that I can finally have security. God, bring me a relationship so I can finally be happy. God, heal this marriage or this relationship so things can go back to normal. We want to keep the blessing. Hannah says, I want the blessing so that I can give it back to God. Meanwhile, Eli watched her, seeing her lips moving, but hearing no sound, he thought she had been drinking. Must you come here drunk, he demanded. Throw away your wine. Don't miss the fact that the spiritual leader of the entire nation of Israel looks at this shattered, desperate woman and just assumes she's drunk. I mean, sit with how bad that is for a moment. The one person whose entire job description is to recognize what real worship looks like completely misses the most honest prayer in the whole building. But Hannah doesn't let Eli's bad judgment shut her down. She says, oh no, sir, I haven't been drinking wine or anything stronger, but I am very discouraged and I was pouring out my heart to the Lord. Don't think I'm a wicked woman. She doesn't get defensive. She just tells the truth. She says, I know how bad this looks, but I'm not what you assume. I'm a woman of faith, and I'm a woman in real pain and distress. And both of those things can be true at the exact same time. Here's something that I've come to believe after years of sitting with people in their own version of this story. God is not offended by our mess when we finally bring it to him. He's far more concerned when we refuse to bring him our mess. The version of Hannah that should worry us isn't the one of her weeping at the tabernacle. It's the version of the one who smiles through dinner and says, everything's fine, and lets the bitterness quietly bury itself in her chest. Because there's a real difference between the pain we process with God and the pain that we just carry. The pain we process with God moves, it changes shapes. It eventually gets to the point that we can set it down. The pain that we carry just gets buried, and buried pain just waits and then shows itself through resentment or control and an inability to celebrate somebody else's blessing because yours never came. Hannah could have easily let this harden into bitterness towards Peninnah or Elkanah, but instead she just brings it to God. I wonder, where does your pain go first? Does it go to God, or does it go everywhere else, like to venting or to scrolling, to numb, only to go to God as a last-ditch effort if it reaches him at all? Eli responds, in that case, go in peace. May the God of Israel grant the request you have asked of him. And here's the line that I really want us to slow all the way down on. The text says that then she went back and began to eat again, and she was no longer sad. She wasn't pregnant yet. She didn't have a baby yet. She didn't have an answer yet. Nothing about her circumstances had changed. She still has to go home with Elkanah. She still has to sit across from Peninnah. She didn't have a child, but her face was no longer sad because she had finally taken her hands off the situation and put it in the only hands that could actually do something in her situation. And it's in the surrender that she found peace. It's easy to read the story and think, well, she got her answer eventually. But look at the timing. Her face changes before she ever gets the answer. Her peace came from that encounter, not from the outcome. And that's worth repeating. The presence of God, not merely the provision of God, changes our hearts. The Lord remembered her, and in due time, Hannah gave birth to a son, and she named him Samuel. And every time she said that little boy's name for the rest of her life, it was like a tiny prayer of remembrance. Samuel is a walking reminder that God heard her. Then comes the part of the story that most of us conveniently would forget. In that culture, weaning could take 2, 3, sometimes 5 years. So Hannah gets to keep Samuel at home for a season, time of him being fully hers. Yet true to her word, she takes him back to Shiloh and she gives him back to God. She asks Eli, do you remember me? I'm the woman standing here praying that you thought was drunk, but I was praying for this child, and the Lord gave me a son, and now I'm dedicating him to God for his entire life. And then the text simply says, they worshiped. Can you imagine you waited for a child, you wept over him before he even existed, and now he's finally here, and you turn around and you hand him to the guy that lives at the temple? That's the hardest kind of worship there is. The kind that doesn't just celebrate what God gave you, but hands it right back to him. That's worship that says, God, you're more important to me than your gifts. You're more important than my dreams. You're more important than my son. In chapter 2, we actually get to read Hannah's prayer. She prays, my heart rejoices in the Lord. In the Lord, my horn is lifted high. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I delight in your deliverance. The horn is a symbol of strength, kind of like a bull or a ram. The horn is not only a weapon, it's also their dignity. Hannah's saying, I used to walk into the temple with my head down, and now I walk with my head held high, but not because of Samuel. I walk with my head high because of the Lord. The gift was Samuel. The joy is the relationship she has with God. And that distinction matters more than you might think, because a lot of us build our entire joy on the gift instead of the giver. I'll have joy when I get the promotion, when I get married, when the treatment works, when the kid finally calls back. Those are good things to want, but if your joy is entirely dependent on the outcome, then you're just one phone call away from losing all of your joy. Hannah had just given her gift back to God, and her joy is still fully intact because it was never actually anchored in the gift to begin with. She keeps going. There is no one holy like the Lord. The bows of the warriors are broken, but those who stumble are armed with strength. But those who were hungry hunger no more. She who was barren has borne 7 children. The Lord sends poverty and wealth. He humbles and he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honor. There's a pattern there. Did you see it? Bows are broken, stumbling are made strong, full go hungry, hungry are fed, barren women have children. Hannah recognizes that something bigger than her story is happening. This is how God operates. He has never once been impressed by the world's scoreboard, and he's never been intimidated by somebody's empty hands. And then, almost like a prophecy she couldn't fully understand the weight of, Hannah's prayer ends with these words: the Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. Now you have to remember that when Hannah prayed this, Israel didn't have a king. They weren't talking about a king. There's no throne. There's no monarchy. But Samuel, the baby that she just hands over, is going to be the one who anoints Israel's first king. He's also going to be the one who anoints David, the king through whose family line the Messiah is going to come. A grieving, barren woman from a small town in the hill country praying in obscurity at a rural tabernacle ends up prophesying about the coming of Christ, centuries before anybody else was even asking the question. That seems to be how God works. He takes the overlooked, the barren, the waiting room people, and he walks them straight into the biggest story that there has ever been. So let's bring this home, because I don't want to give you some lines to trace as you pray this week. I want you to understand why those lines are important. First, we need to take our pain to God before we take it anywhere else. Hannah chose to deal with the pain of Peninnah's provoking and Elkanah's help by going to the tabernacle, not to gossip with somebody who'd take her side, not to numb it by doom scrolling on a screen. She takes it to God. And I think a lot of us have that backwards. We process our pain with everybody and everything else first, and we see God as our last resort, if we bring it to him at all. But what if this week your first move was prayer? It doesn't have to be a polished prayer. Actually, a pouring out your soul in tears of frustration prayer is a whole lot better. What would that actually look like on Monday morning? Maybe it means the second you get the diagnosis, before you call your mom, before you get online and search it for hours, before you tell a single other soul, you just go to God. Maybe it means the same argument happens with your spouse again. It's the 100th time you've gone over this. Instead of just sitting around and stewing on it all day or firing off a text to a friend who's going to take your side, go into a room and pour your soul out before God, unfiltered, just like Hannah did. You might look a little unhinged doing that. I mean, Eli thought Hannah was drunk. Some of the people around you might not understand the real desperation before God, and that's really fine, because you're not performing for them. You're pouring out your soul to the Lord, and he's never been embarrassed by your mess. The second thing is peace comes before the answer does. Hannah walks out of that tabernacle just as barren as she walked in. Nothing about her circumstances had changed. But her face was no longer downcast because she had released the weight of her struggle to the only one who could actually carry it. Some of you are waiting for your circumstances to change before you let yourself feel any peace. I want to gently suggest that that's backwards. If your peace is only available once everything comes to a nice, tidy resolution with a bow on top, you're signing up for a long, miserable wait. Because some prayers take days, some take months, some take years, some take decades. Hannah shows us there's a way to live faithfully, even joyfully, in the space between the prayer and the answer. Thirdly, when the answer does come, don't let it curdle into pride. Hannah has every human justification to gloat over Peninnah. She could turn around and say, see, God chose me after all. Who's laughing now? And honestly, that's an easy thing to do. The moment that we finally get vindicated after years of being overlooked, we can get a little pompous and arrogant. Instead, Hannah doesn't mention Peninnah at all. Her song almost immediately turns from her circumstances to God's character. When God finally comes through for you, he restores the marriage, he heals the diagnosis, brings the wandering kid home. Don't let the testimony stop with, look at what God did for me. Let it become, look at who God is, because that truth will still be standing long after that particular answer to a prayer has faded into memory. I want us to end where Hannah's song ends, pointing forward to a king she would never meet in her lifetime. She sings about this anointed before Israel even had a throne. And centuries later, that anointed king arrives, not born into comfort or status, but born into a family raised in a nothing town and eventually nailed to a cross. On the other side of that cross came the greatest reversal history has ever seen. Death was defeated, shame turned into glory, and an empty tomb where a body should have been. Hannah was not the only one who gave her son to be part of our redemption story. God also gave us his son, but he is the redemption story. Hannah asked God for a son and gave him back. God didn't wait for us to ask. God gave first. He handed over his son while we were still the ones weeping in the waiting room, still the ones nobody else understood, still the one with empty hands. That's the difference between Hannah's story and the gospel. Hannah's surrender was a response to God's kindness. The cross is God's kindness, offered before we ever surrendered anything at all. And that's exactly what's waiting for us at the table. As we go to the table today, I want us to go the way that Hannah went to the tabernacle. Not polished, not performing, not with our composure fully intact, just honest. Bring whatever waiting room you're sitting in right now. Bring the diagnosis, the marriage, the family problems. Bring the prayer you've prayed so many times, you've really stopped expecting God to answer it all. Don't clean it up first. Just come as you are and pour it out in front of God the way that Hannah did. Because the bread that we're about to eat represents a body that was broken so that yours doesn't have to stay that way. And the cup represents blood that was poured out so completely that there's nothing left for you to pour out that God can't handle. Hannah walked into the temple with empty arms and walked out with a promise that she couldn't quite see yet. At the table, we also arrive with empty hands. And we walk away carrying the very blood and the body of the king that Hannah's prayer was pointing us all towards. So as the elements come to you this morning, don't just take them. Pour something out first. Whatever you've been carrying, whatever you're afraid to lay down, whatever prayer feels like it's just bouncing off the ceiling, set it down in front of him as you take the bread and the cup, and let your face be lifted and your joy be rekindled before the answer even comes. I hope you have a wonderful week. Never forget how deeply you're loved, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.